Brian.
Okay, fine. To begin, I'll say that I don't agree with anything in the conference to date. For one, art in the 60s and 70s went through a whole shift away from the object to the ecosystem, to the system. It was written up well by Jack Burnham. And the idea was that we're not going to deal with plants or with things. We were going to deal with ecological systems and their complexity and their diversity. And the other point being that we don't really want super plants. We want fellow animals. We are animals. We're not plants. We do not want to be focusing on farming. We want to be returning back to the initial way we operate on this planet as thieves, hunting, fishing, gathering. That is outlined by a MIT-trained engineer saying in her book on water, A Natural History, that in North America, where I'm from, I apologize, we need 250 million beaver, 80 million buffalo, at least, billions of prairie dogs, and tens of millions of alligators just to maintain the water supply that we need to have sustainable land or terrain in North America. The drought is an extremely serious problem now. It's caused by global warming, for example, by certain kinds of land use we have. And there is for my daughter, who's only 10, she does not think we have a sustainable future at all. And whether we human beings should be on the planet is really questionable. Might be better off with ants. Let's just say that we have to find ways of having our fellow animals in their more elaborate development, say as in the whale upstairs and so on, present in great quantity and not have super plants or you focus on just one kind of object as a solution to our problem, so-called. Now, I'll just turn to art and try to be quick. The point here is that art has been around for some time and is a way for us to deal with our, how do we change it? Is move to, here are the animals. Here's what we have to think about. This is what we need. Here's an image from 1917. That image is said to be the most influential art piece of the 20th century. And I say, well, if it's influential, it's going to have to achieve this, mapping of the planet. If you go to that oil company conference across the way, they will have on the floor, you can walk into it, maps of the world that you can kind of walk on like Adolf and see the world all subordinated to yourself. But there's no Antarctica, there's no Greenland, there's no Arctic. Amazing. Here we center the whole world on Antarctica, and we have three urinals, so to speak, the Pacific urinal, the Atlantic urinal with the Arctic, and the Indian Ocean urinal. These are all basins going into the center of the planet being Antarctica, and then you have something about Central Asia down there. This is how we map the world, and with that we look, okay, what is going on ecologically in that world? Well, it's turning dry. So what we do is we try to figure out ways, and this is by Dennis Oppenheim, 1969, Ocean Projects, Museum of Modern Art, of producing energy from algae, marine algae. He has rotting marine algae and made flame from that. And the idea was that we can have fire from living plants, yes, and we already know that now, but do that in the ocean. I just brought this in a little bit to show some kind of science. The main point is that Fat Corner by Joseph Beuys gives us an idea about, well, how do you achieve fat corner? Everything has to go through fat corner. It's really about how do you deal with water and how do you deal with carbon to achieve some kind of cycle in this society going round and round and round where you have CO2, O2 exchanges, not only one way to us, but also us back to them. So as animals and plants in exchange relative to archaebacteria and bacteria in this kind of overall system throughout the ecosystem. I might observe here that in the same year that Joseph Beuys had this idea of centralizing fat corner around a performance, so to speak, 1977 was the year that a quite prominent U.S. scientist, Dr. Carl Woza, came up with the theory that there were three major elements in the exchange program of life, archaebacteria, bacteria, and animals, plants. If you're going to talk about plants, you have to talk about animals. They are in exchange back and forth. They're equal. And here's another paradigm, of course, Robert Smithson, spiral jetty. A living system is going up and down, and it has a certain kind of life values. And this is, I think, something we need to bear in mind. It is an ecosystem element. It's not just a plant. so that you use the same vocabulary to figure out how to deal with mountains, and especially we have in North Africa, we have in much of America, actually much of the planet, major problems of water just rushing off the mountains into the sea. Well, how do we begin to have it retained and make marshes? And what do you do when you get to the coastal waters? How do you use the same kind of Smithson vocabulary for that? I might say that some of this thinking has been adopted by Russians very effectively in the Iran-Iraq War. I have a videotape of that, and it was published here in Nederland back during that time. Now, here's another paradigm from art, a bicycle wheel, ha ha ha. 1913, 100 years ago, Marcel Duchamp. But that bicycle wheel is not useless to, shall we say, an icon, something we have to do. Because about that time, there was a decision by major engineers to not have water wheels, but instead have high dams with turbines, which actually Ursula Beeman shows very effectively in our show, destroys the river. How do we have a water wheel system leading to an undershot water wheel based on a mathematician, Mr. Poncelet, again with ideas of the kind of easy, lightweight bicycle wheel system for easily deployed water wheels around anywhere that you might want to get hydropower, not using dams. And you can do this actually in some, for example, in Bavaria, this is Bavaria, some 20,000 sites, and essentially not have dams at all. Just go back to the water wheel system and not be subordinate to the kind of regime of the high dam, as in, say, now occurs in China. That is a very simple drawing of what I had thought could be done here in Holland, and I will be trying to do now in the coming weeks of identifying all the places where it can be in the harvest with some kind of gantry crane or some other, or maybe a rowboat, all the water plants that accumulate in front of the dams of Holland. As you know, the water is dammed, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and so on. You have these dikes, and there's lots of fresh water coming down, lots of plants accumulating. How do you remove them and produce energy? That's a very simple diagram of the concept, but the idea is that you can do a great deal of harvesting of plants in the wild, or at least in the nature of Holland, in the open system. You don't need tanks. You don't need any kind of complexity. There's a lot of green junk. In fact, right out here in the right here by the museum, lots of green stuff that needs to be picked up and scooped up, and that can be turned into some kind of fuel. The same thing can be done with water plants in the North Sea. I understand Wageningen is working with Texel on this thing. We've been pioneering this thing in a number of countries of the world, including New Zealand. With that kind of rig system, that's just a schematic of it. And maybe more importantly, the naval architect with whom we worked on this larger plant system, I'll tell you about that in a second, he is now the naval architect for the America Cup yacht. So it's not unimportant the kind of people involved in this project. What happens here is this. Superplants. The world's fastest growing plant is macrocystis algae. It grows about, well, they say various figures, but let's just say hypothetically 2 meters a week. It can grow that fast. It can grow to 100 meters length. It can have this kind of cage system to be tethered and then grown in huge quantity. I am given, if you will, permission by a scientist in England to work on this in Chile. I'm trying to get land and coastal waters there. In any case, the possibility of producing energy from marine biomass is colossal, just with this very, very fast-growing plant that already exists. It's already in the ecosystem. Very importantly, it doesn't exist by itself. It exists with other animals, with sea urchins and with regular fin fish. It's actually very good for the habitat. So you don't think plants only, think about the fact that the plants are in a marine habitat with fish. And that's a model of the system, just as was produced in France. And we need to get it built, and that's the kind of flame you can produce. Really, it just ad hoc right away with stuff coming out. And that's the kind of dumb collection you can do on the shore. There are, and I don't know what you do here in Europe, but we have many unemployed people. We can start harvesting excess algae all the time, especially in places like Ireland, and making energy. I'm going to just wrap up by saying that if you look at the planet, the cold water areas have enormous bioproductivity of these giant algae, both laminaria or macrocystis. These are two types of basic kelp. And all those blue areas could become part of an industrial system that obviates the or prevents the need for us to rely on monocultural systems, but it allows us to work within the overall ecosystem so that as we do that, there are also whales, there are also dolphins, there are also penguins. There's a mixture of animals and plants together in as much of a wild condition as possible. And you can see some of the areas right here. For example, the tremendous bioproductivity just off the coast of Holland and England, and along that coast. Anything red there is highly subject to harvesting now. I speak not as myself, but really in view of work done by scientists. In this case, scientists from the United States and China. This report, sponsored by New York State, was produced in 1983. The conference was in 1982. The idea was to have wild systems for producing wild plants, or allowing wild plants to grow and then be harvested and make biogas. It was all about making methane gas. This report was then aired and brought to the attention of the governor of the state of New York in the past few months. That governor of the state of New York has decided on the basis of this kind of documentation and some other documents to postpone fracking. You may have heard about fracking, this idea of shale gas. As I show here in the exhibition, Argentina is on the verge of having a massive shale gas project. Let's just say that shale gas will probably ruin rivers and probably ruin habitats. It has all kinds of deadly effects on the environment. If we can go with this kind of system with wilderness, open sea, growth of marine algae, having rafts and any kind of farm structure or hold-fast structure out there, working together with China, #2 power in the world economically. United States, #1 power in the world. Okay, they have a lot of power. Do this worldwide in the kind of outline I indicated in the cold waters, for example. We could, I think, avoid the fracking problem. As we all know now, this conference nearby, where they're talking about deep-sea drilling. Well, you know what deep-sea drilling does when there's a mistake. Do we really want that? Do we want to have any more fossil fuels? Do we want to have any more climate change? We can go with this kind of technology. We can do this pretty much right away. And we don't need to have super plants. We just need to have the existing plants that are already there in the environment. Why? So we can have wild animals. It is a tragedy that not only is there something going on in Libya recently, but there's no more lions in Libya. There used to be lions in Libya. Why isn't there savanna and lions in Libya? Why isn't there lions in North Africa? Why aren't we having wild animals again? And this is something we have to always be aware of. We need to have fellow higher species of animals, fellow carnivores, because otherwise we're going to be dead. Nice.